Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 11th annual Anlin Ku Lecture on Chinese Culture. My name is Dennis Kratz. I have the honor to serve as the director of the university's Center for Asian Studies. A few words first about uh, the people who make all of this possible. The lecture this evening is co-sponsored by multiple agencies, the Center for Asian Studies, also the Harry W. Bass Jr. School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology. You notice there was no period after Junior and a pause for a comma after technology. I'm very honored to have here the dean of the school of the Bass School and the wonderful first lady of the school, Dean Niels Rumer and Cricket. We're also, everything we do is co-sponsored with the Crow Museum of Asian Art at the University of Texas at Dallas. And of course, think that's it for now. But one other sponsor we must mention, and that is our dear friend Jeff Robinson and Stephanie Schneidler, who honor the person actually who makes this all possible. Her name was Anlin Ku. She was an immigrant from China, a mother, a professional, and a passionate supporter and promoter of the role of Chinese in America and their contributions to American culture. So again, thank you, Jeff and Steph, also for making this possible. My role is to introduce the introducer. I'm pleased to call to the stage my dear friend, the Catherine R. Cecil Professor of Foreign Languages at the University of Texas at Dallas, an accomplished scholar of many books, a capacious and intriguing mind, and I'm proud to say a good friend, Dr. Mingdong Gu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dennis, for giving me this honor. I would like to tell you, he gives me the honor for a special reason. Not because I was or have been his assistant for so many years, but because I have a special connection with our guest speaker. When I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, I came to know Dr. Faure through his scholarship. I admired his scholarship because then I read two of his books, both published by Princeton University Press. The one is, I still remember the title, Insights and Oversights, Epistemological Critique of Zen Buddhism. The other is Rhetoric of Immediacy. And there is still another about Buddhism. So I came to know him through scholarship. And then I was fortunate enough to meet him in person about 23 years ago in Paris at an academic conference. When I was, reading his scholarship, I said, oh, I only wish someday I could write a book like this. And Dr. Faure, of course, this year I published a book called Nature and Rationale of Zen and Enlightenment, the Mind of a Prenatal Baby. And my book, to a certain extent, was inspired by Dr. Faure's work. And also Dr. Faure was kind enough to write an endorsement remark for the book. His generous remark make me feel very warm and happy. So this is a special connection. I would like to say a few words about his scholarship. I think he's a world-renowned scholar of Buddhism, especially Zen Buddhism and Japanese religion. He has been a distinguished professor in various renowned universities. For instance, currently, Columbia University, and then Stanford University, previous Cornell University. And he published numerous books, I think over a dozen monographs and a equal number of edited volumes. So I was so impressed. I really thought, how could he produce so many books? Does he sleep? I wondered, does he sleep? So I think for us, it is really, really a great honor to have been able to invite him to our university to give this lecture on Buddhism. His topic, you already read or heard the title of his talk. It is the new perspectives on the life of the Buddha. I think it is related or based on his most recent book, that is the 1001 Lives of the Buddha. Since Buddha departed from this world, there have been numerous, literally thousands of biographies about the Buddha. Many, of course, are hagiographies. And Dr. Faure offers his new perspective on the lives of the Buddha. So therefore, tonight, we will be treated to an intellectual feast. And English has a saying, the testing of the Buddha is in the eating. So since we are ready for a feast, let us welcome Dr. Faure to present the feast to us. Let's welcome him.
Thank you for this very kind introduction. To answer your question right away, to publish so many books, you have to learn this little trick. You have to learn how to write while you sleep. So it's not so hard, but you have to know how to do that. I'm very pleased and honored to be here at this, at the University of Dallas. I've never been here before, so it's a first for me, and definitely to be among such a friendly audience is quite a treat too. So thank you so much for coming tonight. So the topic tonight is, as you can see, about the life of Buddha. It's not a topic that I've been working for a long time, as Professor Gu mentioned. My field has been more like Chan and Zen Buddhism, and then more recently, for the past 10 years or so, it was on what's called esoteric Buddhism, Japanese esoteric Buddhism. And at the moment, my real center of interest is about Buddhism and neuroscience. So you see, it's very different from the life of a Buddha. But I always got a little bit, I would say, annoyed by the image of the Buddha that I could read about in the books, because it was always about the historical Buddha. And here I put historical in quotation marks, because basically, as you will see when I present my data, we really don't know much about the Buddha, right? We just don't know anything. So we have an image of, as a model of who the Buddha was, and that's very important. But in terms of the historical Buddha, we must say, it's much of it relies on imagination. But basically, when the Western scholars discovered Buddhism, this was taken for granted that if you look at the text carefully, you could find the true Buddha. And I've been looking like others at this text carefully, and I find a real beautiful image of a Buddha, but not Buddha, right? Or as one historian said, maybe I'll quote him later in my talk, basically, if we put away the legend, which is what historian wants to do, what's left, about the historical Buddha? Well, basically, that he lived, that he was born, he lived, he had some kind of spiritual experience, and he died. Now, it doesn't take, if I couldn't last for 1 hour, right? With just this, so I have to elaborate a little bit more. So first, of course, for those of you, I'm sure many of you I know about the life of Buddha, but not. So I'm going to just show a few slides first and go through the various aspects of his life, and then I will get into the more troublesome matter of the historiography, the so-called biography of the Buddha. So Buddha's birth, right? So as you may know again, right? Maya, Queen Maya, had a dream. She dreamed of an elephant that came down it's here at the bottom right of the image. You see she's lying down, and somewhere, I can't even see it now. But anyway, on the top of the image, you have an elephant that's diving, right? And the elephant is supposed to be the Buddha himself. The Buddha had been living many lives and was reborn in his penultimate life in Tushita heaven, in one heaven, waiting for his last rebirth. And it shows what would be the best parents for him to be. And then he decided to be reborn as a child of King Suddhodana and Queen Maya in northern India. Interestingly here, see the way the legend evolves. Here, this image of the Buddha, the image of a white elephant penetrating, even in a dream, penetrating the womb, basically, of a queen was seen as, in China, that was seen as a little bit too problematic. So, and the idea that the Buddha himself would turn into an elephant. We're told, for example, when he was choosing which animal he should be reborn in, he considered various animals like a rabbit and other things. When he settled on an elephant, that would be dignified enough as a symbol. But for some people then, in China, the notion of Buddha as an elephant penetrating Queen Maya's bosom was seen as problematic. So the Chinese saw him as riding a white elephant, which is a little bit more appropriate, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to, I could go on and on in aspect of the legend. Here's the same image, right? You see the Buddha elephant and Queen Maya. Same here, a different version of this. Then the birth of the Buddha. Before he becomes a Buddha, he's called a bodhisattva, a being bound to body, to awakening. So through many lifetimes, he has been performing, practicing austerities and so on, accumulating merits and so on, so that he would be reborn, the Indian system of birth, death, and rebirth and karma. But eventually, he's born as a child of this kingly couple. Now here again, on this image, you see, this is just after the birth, and the little Buddha, who is already, doesn't look like a baby, he looks like a little man, he's already perfect, right? He stands, can you see it on the left side, at the foot of the second person on the left side. This little guy there, little Buddha, that's him. Often, this is Queen Maya, and she gives birth by holding a branch of a tree in the park in Lumbini, in what is now Nepal. In later images, in other representations, he comes out from the left side of his mother. You can see him, right? He's coming out of the left side. Because it was thought that a future Buddha coming out through the normal way, as we know, relatively impure. That was not very dignified for Buddha. So he had to come magically, as it were, from the left side. In China, again, this, here you can see Queen Maya is pretty appealing young woman, right? In a convenient way. Sometimes. Isn't Mike still working? Yeah? Okay, I can. In India, that was seen as still, again, a little bit problematic. So they dressed Queen Maya much more fully, and so he comes out of her sleeve. Right? So anyway, little details. You can see here, coming out of the left side. And here's you see the Nepalese version, and again, he comes from practically under her armpit. Right? And this, as you can see, right? For a Chinese was a little bit too much, right? So they had to make it a little bit more politically correct. Is this better?
I think it's cutting out too much.
Oh, so it does. I get the feeling it was cutting. And this one? Is it? It's better? Okay. Thanks. Thank you for that. All right. So then, when the Buddha was born, the first thing he did was to make 7 steps and declare I'm in the world, I'm the only honored one. So he's born with full knowledge, which is interesting, right? He's already the ruler, the king of this world, as it were. He's already enlightened. But later on, he will forget this. He will have to go through all the hardship again to restore, as it were, to his enlightenment. After a while, when he lives in the palace with his father, he has no clue about what life is about. Right? So he has to rediscover this all again. So you see here, this is an Indian representation. He's doing the first steps. And again, basically, that's a step that shows that he's conquering the world, spiritually, of course. Then, I'm going very fast, of course. Right? So he spent years in the palace of his father. Has been told that if he could become either a ruler, a king, universal king, or an enlightened being. And of course, the father wants him to be a king because he is himself a king. So he wants his son to succeed him. So he decided to hide him from the hardship, difficulties of life. And so he's basically sequestered in the palace. But eventually he goes out on 4 fateful encounters and he meets, an old man, sick man, and a corpse, and eventually a monk. And that's seeing a Buddhist monk. Of course, there's no Buddhist monk yet, but there's a certain circularity there. But anyway, he realizes there's a way out. When he discovers that everyone dies, including him, will die, he's not too happy about it, of course. So that's when he decides to find a solution. So that's the beginning of his quest. Eventually, then, he decides to renounce the world. Here you see he's cutting his hair. And he's with his faithful servant and his horse, and the servant and the horse are crying, but basically he has decided to just leave the world, and his parents and his wife. He's married at this time, and he has a child, according to some accounts. Other accounts, the child will come later. But so basically now he starts a real 6 years of severe austerities, ascetic practices, almost kills himself. And he becomes so emaciated, as you can see here, but even worse here, right? To the point, really, to the brink of death, right? You can see our Indian representations here. So if he realized at one point that he's just going to die, and decided this is not the way. So he decided to change his way and then start again taking food. And eventually he goes, to sit under the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening, and will reach enlightenment. I'm sorry, I put many of those that are striking. But then he reaches Bodhi tree of awakening, and he's there. He's going to be attacked by Mara. Mara is a devil, right? The ruler of this world. Mara is the king of this world, really, and decide that he must prevent the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, from becoming a Buddha. Otherwise, he will be dislodged from his status. So he attacks him with armies. So you see here a presentation, Mara riding an elephant and all the demons attacking the Buddha. Excuse me. They're more of the same. This is Thai representations here. So Mara again on his horse, and at the bottom here, so you see the Buddha is sitting in meditation, and below him is the earth deity, the earth goddess, because Mara defies the Buddha, saying, basically, who do you think you are? I'm the ruler of the world, and you are nothing. And Mara then, the Buddha calls the earth deity to witness, and she said, no, through many lifetimes, he has performed ritual, he has worshipped me and all that, and so he's worth of becoming a Buddha. Incidentally, and then here in this image, but this is a really typically Southeast Asian representation, she wrings her hair, and the water that comes out of her drowns all the Mara's army. This is only found in Southeast Asia, not in other Buddhist traditions, basically. But in Southeast Asia too, it seemed like people objected to the presence again of this rather comely lady so close to the Buddha, who is an ascetic, right? So they have today in today's Thailand, there's been discussion about whether or not they should keep her so close there. There's Puritanism everywhere. So at that point, then he called the earth to witness. So he has this famous gesture where he touches the earth, and the earth resounds like thunder, and Mara and his armies are defeated. So the same image here, you'll see it everywhere in Southeast Asia. Not in East Asia so much, but because this is at Musée Guimet in France, it's a beautiful painting. Yeah, taking the earth to witness. All right, okay, you get the idea. But I wanted to show some different ways to represent these different elements. Then he reaches awakening. Not much to say about that. He spent the whole night meditating, and throughout the night he sees his past lives. He understands the causality that rules the world, and the reality of suffering, that the whole life is suffering, but that he has not reached a way out of this suffering. After that, he spent 7 weeks sitting under the Bodhi tree, and at one point there's rain, it's rainy season, so there's a flood, and he's protected by a Naga king, it's a snake. Basically, Nagas are spiritual beings, but looking like snakes, and this one has 7 heads, and the hood is protecting the Buddha during that time. That's again a motif you find mostly in Southeast Asia. Then he starts preaching. Again, there's not much to say about that. There's some few legends, but 50 years of predication, and the predication is called, usually in Buddhist terms, to set the wheel of the Dharma into motion. So that's the wheel of the Dharma, the idea that the teaching is a kind of a wheel that makes mankind progress. He performs some miracles, while here, for example, he has fire and water at some point in order to convert the unbelievers, the heretics, he performs miracles. So here he has fire coming out of his shoulders and water coming out of his feet. Okay, no need to. So of course, this for historians is total nonsense, right? So, but it's really important in the belief of people who all over the world. I mean, in Asia certainly call themselves Buddhists. So it's the same miracle, and eventually, after 50 years of preaching, he reaches nirvana, what we would call death, but it's not death in this case, it's just entering into the absolute realm. So, and of course, his disciples are totally, are grieving over this. The one here is interesting because he's represented really pretty much as being kind of mummified. I mean, he's wrapped into bands, but in other forms, you can see his head, or it's more like this thing you can see in Southeast Asia, where he looks like he's kind of resting. He doesn't seem like he's on the way. But historians have again looked at this moment. This is maybe the historical element, because we're told the Buddha died of an indigestion of pork. Now, of course, Buddhists, as you know, are vegetarians. So historians would say, no, that looks like a true, that's something that they couldn't erase because it was well known. But Buddhists were trying to say, no, it's not really pork. It's named, the pork delicacy here is named for some mushroom dish, So they've been trying to explain this away. But historians would say, no, that looks like real, having this guy dying from basically diarrhea or something like that, after eating too much. That sounds like a human person. So they love that. But of course, that's only one among many, many stories, and it could just have been a way to debase actually the Buddha rather than embellish his life. So anyway, don't want to emphasize this too much. You see all these different representations here, and this is Japanese. So it became a theme, very important theme in Japan. You have this beautiful nirvana images there, where all his disciples and around him and above him all the gods, and below him all the animals of the world are lamenting, right? And you see on the right corner and above his mother, who has been told she's died. I forgot to mention that she died just after he was born, and she has been reborn in heaven. And she's heard about it, and now she's coming on a cloud to mourn the Buddha himself. So you can see we're in the midst of course, it's very easy to say all this is just pure legend, right? Okay, and then of course, after he dies, he's cremated, and his relics are worshipped in stupas, what are called as famous stupas in India, but all over Asia, you find the stupas. And then there's even, I like this one, there's some kind of parodic representation, so-called vegetable nirvana, where he's represented as a big radish, right, surrounding, and all these disciples are also represented as vegetables. Right? This one is particularly famous. Japanese painter Ito Jakushu's vegetable nirvana. You could say, oh, they're making fun of a Buddha. No, they are not. The Ito Jakushu was really a very devout Buddhist, and he did this. He painted this after his brother's death. So definitely, there's even one that I didn't put here, which is seems even more almost, caricatural, in which it's actually there's a representation of it at the British Museum. It's called it's known as the phallic nirvana, where he's represented actually as a large phallus, like, and all his disciples are represented with the head of, again, kind of a sexual organ. So you would say, now that's really almost anti-clerical, but I don't think it was. It was like, in what I want to emphasize here, I don't have the time, but as Buddhism developed and among the people, the emphasis was also seen on, like here, also on fertility. Right, fertility is a very important part of Asian religions. So I think, in a sense, there's a merging here of local religion and Buddhist ideals. People would say this is a deviation of Buddhism. Probably is, but at the same time, I don't think it's simply a caricature. I think there's probably some kind of religious feeling about this. All right, so that's my very quick representation. Now I move to the second part in historiography versus mythology. And all right, then I'll be reading this. This is a hard part for me and for you, probably. But anyway, let's go. It was around the middle of the 19th century that Buddhist studies took off, with the work of the Indologist Eugène Burnouf, a French scholar, 1801, 1852, and the first triumphs of philology and historicism. Burnouf emphasized the human personality and the historical importance of the Buddha. From the second half of the 19th century, in reaction to what it perceived as fabrications, the historicist current sought to reduce the Buddha's legend to its simplest expression, hoping to find its historical substratum. So I use the word historicism here, not historical, right? For a view of an ideological view, which really think that nothing, materialistic history is the only thing that's true, right? And no spiritual element would be part of that. What credit should we lend to the Buddha's legend? Most biographies of the Buddha rest on a double criterion of credulity and skepticism. To retain any episode that presents itself in realistic traits, that's what I call credulity, and to reject everything that belongs to the marvelous, right? So credulity and skepticism. As one of the biographers pointed out long ago, a man called Edward Thomas, I quote, "The question remains whether we are justified in retaining from this legend portions which seem credible to us, or if the entire legend is not the invention of an era." So he's one of the few who actually saw the problem as I think it is, and not just trying to find really the historical Buddha. Unfortunately, there is no method that allows us to separate the man Gautama, or as he's called, from the Buddha of the legend. Most of those who claim that this character must have lived behave as if such a method existed, without bothering to explain why they believe it existed, what they believe it is or should be so. We must therefore reverse the usual way of thinking. As far as one can tell, there was in early Buddhism no basic biography, in the modern sense, of the Buddha, on which legendary elements later grafted themselves. We only find various legends not yet unified into a biography, even a simple one. That's really a puzzle, right? You will imagine in the West, as a Western, it's very simple. Someone lived, right? So from birth to death, you have his life, his biography. so that should be the same for the Buddha. But there is no such thing. It took centuries for a biography to finally be concocted from various elements. Or, to borrow the core metaphor often used by historians, there is no factual core around which multiple legendary layers grew. There are no criteria to separate the historical Buddha by peeling the many layers of myth and legend. The life of a Buddha is more like an onion, which one can peel without ever meeting a nucleus. More like an onion than like a mango, let's say. Right? At first glance, the thesis that the Buddha's legend is only the embellished image of a real personage seems reasonable. The text of the Pali tradition, Pali is one of the two main languages, one of the, well, several main languages in which Buddha's text came to us. So there's the language of the southern tradition as opposed to Sanskrit, language of the northern tradition. And then, of course, you have Chinese, Japanese, Korean. The text of the Pali tradition in particular claim to rest on certain historical data. And we also see in the monastic codes, so-called Vinaya, obvious efforts to present the Buddha as a pragmatic person, even down to earth, or in any case, concerned about hearsay. You know, when some monks do something a little bit strange, you know, monk has been seen with a woman, say, okay, he did nothing wrong, but I don't want people to think something might happen. So no monk can ever be seen alone with a woman, right? Because, yeah, you don't want the rumor to develop. So it seems to have been very pragmatic in that sense. Historians point out, not without reason, that it is easier to mythologize a biography than to demythologize a legend. The criticism of authenticity has therefore thought to demonstrate the historicity of certain facts that seem to go against the Buddhist ideal. I think I will mention that later on. You know, I mentioned the death of a Buddha, right? That's one case. According to them, the historians, the clearly legendary aspects, as found in relatively late texts from the 3rd, 4th century of the Common Era, would constitute embellishments. Hagiography would have distorted the initial biography. In doing so, biographers forget that the reverse process, simplification, is just as plausible. It is naive to believe that the seemingly realistic character of an anecdote, for example, the fatal indigestion of a Buddha, militates in favor of its historicity. Such anecdotes are probably just as artificial as the legends. They often have no other interest or motivation than to justify obscure rules of discipline, and they have generally had no impact on the Buddhist tradition, unlike legends, which are legenda, a term designing etymologically stories to read or to recite. Right? So legends are, in a sense, much more relevant, much more meaningful. The historical research on the life of Buddha rests essentially on the reading of the Pali text I just mentioned, most of which were edited by, in the 19th century, early 20th century, by the Pali Text Society at the end of the 19th century, right? And some Sanskrit texts expurgated from their mythological slags. On the other hand, the texts described as apocryphal, because they were compiled outside India, and which essentially belong to the so-called Great Vehicle, or Mahayana, have been denied any claim to teach us anything about the authentic Buddha. It is this methodological bias that the anthropologist Stanley Tambaya criticized when he refers to the Pali Text Society spirit. Moreover, the first Pali texts are also in a way apocryphal, since they date from several centuries after the parinirvana, the nirvana of the Buddha. The first known manuscript dates from the 5th century of the Common Era. So we're talking about many centuries, almost 10 centuries after the nirvana of the Buddha. So a lot of things can happen during that time, right? So in the absence of biographical sources, more or less contemporary of the Buddha, the majority of historians agree on an account of the Buddha's life reduced to its simplest expression. But that life paradoxically loses all historical character, becoming a simple archetype, which could be valid for any Indian ascetic, really, Buddhist or not, or for any Buddha, past or future, because Buddha is, in the Buddhist tradition, not the only one of his kind. There has been many before, there will be more, in the future. Far from the fact that the real life of Buddha has acquired over time a legendary character, it is on the contrary, the legend that has been transformed into rudiments of history, into an abstraction empty of content that passes itself as a set of facts. In response to those who claim to pierce the mist of Buddhist legend, we must ask ourselves why, in the absence of any evidence, we are so ready to believe that this mist actually hides someone, and why any skepticism in this area is considered inappropriate. Let us for a moment take the historians at their own word. And I'm a historian too, right? What remains of the life of a Buddha once a legend is sifted by historical criticism? If we stick to the result of the archaeological excavation and to the approximate Indian context of the time, all we can say with a certain degree of certainty can be summed up in a few words. That's what I mentioned earlier. In an ill-defined time, 5 or 6 centuries before the Common Era, lived in North India a man named Siddhartha Gautama, or Shakyamuni, the leader of the Shakya clan, because he came from the Shakya clan. Having renounced the world, he realized after a long ascetic practice a spiritual experience known as awakening or illumination, which earned him the name of the Buddha, the awakened one. He then founded a monastic order that developed and spread throughout India, mainly through the conversion of Emperor Ashoka. This is a Buddhist Constantine, if you want. Subsequently, the new religion spread through the rest of Asia, not without changing considerably in contact with new cultures. So you see, this is it, right? Not much really to write home about there. Just man lived and died. This biography, admittedly plausible, is also perfectly generic and uninspiring. In reality, the life of a Buddha is both a doctrinal epitome and a paradigm of Buddhist practice. Indeed, all Buddhas and Buddhist saints are supposed to go through the same stages as the Buddha Shakyamuni himself: a spiritual crisis followed by a renunciation to the world, an ascetic period that leads to awakening and obtaining supernormal powers, years of preaching, jealousy aroused by his success and his criticism of a corrupt society, a death announced, predicted, and funerals giving rise to a cult of stupas and relics. So we find exactly the same pattern for all the Buddhas, not just the historical Buddha. Which meant, so there are two ways to look at this, right? Either the life of Buddha inspired the later patterns, or the patterns pre-existed and inspired the life of Buddha. Moreover, this critical biography does not take into account the fact that for the vast majority of Buddhists, it is a completely different life that has been transmitted over the centuries. A grand story made of a multitude of narratives of diverse origins and marvelous anecdotes, which prove far superior to the so-called facts. It is to these narratives that Buddhism owes much of its vitality over the centuries and up to the present day. All things considered, a frankly mythological fiction is better than an insidious historical fiction that doesn't say its name. Now, I'm going to look at this, what I call a problematic dichotomy between, in a study of the life of Buddha. The two main methodological approaches in the study of Buddha's life were inaugurated by the French scholar Émile Senard, who died in 1928, and the German scholar Hermann Oldenberg, died around the same time, 1920. The controversy between these two authors is not only of historical interest, because it was that from the outset, what it is from the outset what determined the terms of a rather sterile debate. The paradigmatic opposition of these two tutelary figures thus takes on an almost mythological character. Following them, the researchers divided into two camps: mythologists who rely on Sanskrit sources, and philologists or historians such as, I mentioned later, Rhys Davids, the founder of the Pali Text Society, who relies on the Pali sources. Subsequently, the trend that emerged in the 1920s was to emphasize the inadequacy of the two approaches and the need to compare not only Indian sources, Pali and Sanskrit, but also Chinese and Tibetan sources. The main exception being that of Richard Gombrich, I return to him, who resolutely adheres to Pali sources. So first, Émile Sénart and the mythological approach. Buddhist historians have tended to view the Buddha's life in its purely Buddhist context, neglecting all the other Indian religions. For the French scholar Émile Sénart, however, the correct approach for a biography of the Buddha can only be the comparative method. Although Sénart became the example not to follow, he was not entirely wrong when he emphasized the essentially mythological nature of the life of the Buddha. According to him, it's not the life of the historical Buddha that was... I mixed the page. It's not only the life of historical Buddha that was masked by the many legendary additions. Rather, it is an older myth in which the Buddha was perceived as a solar deity of the sun deity, that ended up being reduced to human dimensions. At the same time, Sénart denies, or rather relativizes, the importance of the Pali canon, in which he sees a belated attempt to make a fabric of legends and myth a little more likely, more plausible. For Sénart, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. I have a one-mind track, so I cannot do two things at the same time. So this is Émile Sénart, at the time where the mustache was popular. So for Sénart, the mythological elements form a coherent system that anticipates the life of the Buddha. While he accepts the existence of historical elements in this life of the Buddha, he believes that they come from different traditions. He argues that the apparent simplicity of the Pali sources is not necessarily a guarantee of authenticity. I quote, "A priori, this brevity, this apparent simplicity of the Pali data may have a double explanation. It can come from the fact that these versions are more primitive, more authentic, but it can also come from the fact that they have been reworked and simplified." And this usually people don't think about the second possibility. Sénart based his method on the Indian conception of the Buddha, not on Western conceptions. It is unfortunate that he felt eventually obliged at the end to impose his interpretations, wanting to see in the Buddha a solar god or a god of vegetation. That was very popular in the 19th century, right? Mythology and vegetation gods. So that's very dated, outdated. His method is reductive, and it sometimes verges on interpretatory delirium. However, it would be wrong to retain only its caricatural aspects and to reject, as it were, the baby Buddha with the bathwater, as did almost all subsequent researchers. Sénart himself warns us, I quote, "Does this mean that I intend to present the Buddha as an astronomical entity and Buddhism as a sidereal, astral religion, as a naturalistic mythology? No competent reader will lend me this ridiculous view." Yet, most of the readers actually did. So he was, unfortunately, pushed aside. The time may have come to rehabilitate some aspect of Sénart's method. Certainly his comparative methodology, insofar as it imposes its own biased views on materials, seem to us today dated and simplistic. But at least he thought the logic of the myth, which historians too often considered as an insane jumble. Unfortunately, he still remains under the influence of the comparative mythology of his time, which tended to amalgamate all cultures. Now, Oldenberg. No, oops. Yeah, Hermann Oldenberg. In his classical work entitled The Buddha, His Life, His Doctrine, His Order, the German historian Hermann Oldenberg rejects wholesale Senar's thesis. He criticized the latter for denying the historicity of the Buddha and seeing in the life of Buddha a version of the archetypal narrative of the life of the sun god. According to him, the identification of a Buddha as a solar hero is just a bunch of mythological elucubrations, which it is, I must say. The clear distinction between the two scholars, as Oldenberg points out, is due to their different interpretation of the sources, and in particular to their different assessment of the Pali Canon, which for him is the only one to provide credible information on the historical Buddha and his doctrine. It is for this very reason that Senar's attempt, based on Sanskrit sources, was for Oldenberg doomed from the outset. Oldenberg concedes that his scientific position essentially derives from his intimate belief, which is not very scientific, right? But this doesn't prevent him from drawing conclusions as to the historicity of the Buddha. I quote, "Obviously, the narrative in question may be a myth. Allow me, for my part," he says, "to declare my belief that in the story of how the young Sakya became the Buddha, there is really an element of historical memory." So it's maybe a myth, but he's convinced that's really true, right? So Oldenberg's influence proved to be enduring, and it partly explained the lack of interest until recently in vernacular tradition of Southeast Asia, considered irrelevant because they are local and late. This influence is found especially in the English scholar Thomas William Rhys-Davids, there he is, and his wife, Caroline Rhys-Davids. So both are the founders of Pali Text Society, which I mentioned earlier, which made available the text of the Pali Canon well before those of the Sanskrit and Chinese canons, and at the same time determined the main direction of Western Buddhology, so-called Buddhology. So they did a tremendous work, right? The Sacred Book of the East and the Sacred Text of Buddhism have been available through the work of these two scholars, Caroline Rhys-Davids and their colleagues. It's interesting, though. So she's a historicist. She wants to look, but later in life, she published a little novel entitled "I, the Buddha," in which she imagined that the Buddha appears to her as a spirit. You know, this time of occultism and turning table and all that. So, and her child died during the First World War, and she claimed that he was visiting her. So she made the Buddha give a perfectly historical account of his life, except that it's as a spirit. He's speaking himself as a spirit, which is really, really bizarre, I think. But in any case, so like Oldenberg, Rhys-Davids, Thomas, rejects Sanskrit words which can never be considered, according to him, as historical biographies, and therefore should not be used by historians worthy of the name. He says about one of these Sanskrit sources, a text called Mahapadana, I quote, "We find in this treatise the root of this birana weed, right, grass, which, growing with the rest of Buddhism, continued to spread so luxuriantly that it gradually covered much of what was valuable in the early teachings and eventually led to the decline of the ancient faith in its Indian home." As you know, Buddhism disappeared from India and survived only in China and in East Asia and Southeast Asia. The doctrine of the Bodhisattva, the being of wisdom, the Buddha, drove out the doctrine of the Aryan way. That's the time where the Aryans were popular, I guess. Yet, Pache Rhys-Davids, it is among these weeds, so-called weeds, of the Mahayana great vehicle tradition that some of the most beautiful jewels of the Buddhist imagination and thought are to be found. So then I turn to this. I mentioned that, so the contrast between these two approaches, mythological and historical, if you like. Then people try to make a synthesis or to avoid the pitfalls, find a kind of elusive middle way. Toward the middle of the 20th century, new biographical attempts were made, the best known being that of Alfred Fouché, the middle way, author of The Life of the Buddha, that became a classic. The middle way that Fouché claims is for him a guarantee of scientific objectivity. With regard to the controversy between Senard and Oldenberg, he writes, I quote, "If Senard's mythological interpretation, pushed to the extreme, tends to dissipate into smoke the Buddha's personality, Oldenberg's ephemerism, a rationalizing method of interpretation which treats mythological accounts as a reflection of historical events, his ephemerism would lead to a not less serious misunderstanding of this character, the Buddha, who arbitrarily, isolated from his environment, would become incomprehensible. Both Oldenberg and Senard are right and also wrong, right in what they admit and wrong in what they omit. In Senard's image of the Buddha, it is the man that is missing. In Oldenberg's image, it is the God, right? So he's trying to find a middle way there. Easier said than done, though, right? So Fouché rejects both extremes. I quote again. Therefore, we have no choice but to pursue our own path, set between the lofty heights of comparative mythology and the pedestrian way of factual history. I like the way these people used to write, This so I don't know. We don't write like this anymore. Thus, it would be enough to find an original way between seeing the Buddha as a god and seeing him simply as a man. The middle road that he presents with some false modesty as a particular little path. And this, of course, he's talking about the middle way of Buddhism, particular little path, is in fact akin to the famous middle way advocated by the Buddha. Nice program in truth, although less easy to realize than to announce. Even if he thinks it impossible to find the historical bedrock, Fouché persists in finding the historical Buddha behind the legend, while revising downward the historical claims of his predecessors. I quote again. That's all we know, or believe we know with some certainty, about the one who is still called the Buddha. Nothing can be more historical in the usual sense of the term, of the word, than this short biographical notice. Yes, nothing can be less sensational, unquote. Be it as it may, Fouché's biography of the Buddha is a work of fiction, an interlacing of legends and of historical, sociological, or doctrinal insights, anything but an objective biography. For one thing, he lends to the Buddha a psychology that looks suspiciously like that of a modern rationalist thinker. I quote, "The Buddha Sakyamuni was a gentleman to his fingertips, free from the slightest suggestion of charlatanism and fanaticism, as well as endowed with a surpassing strength of mind and perfect serenity." An English gentleman, right? Or French gentleman. There's no such thing as French gentleman. He was also an austere moralist, but without excess and considerate of others, an independent and judicious thinker, as consistent, an enemy of meaningless metaphysics as of vulgar superstition. This gentleman, however, is not the figure worshipped by the Buddhist tradition. Following Fouché, most Western historians advocate a middle way between myth and history. Among the most interesting, I will only mention, without being able to do them justice, Etienne Lamotte, Monseigneur Etienne Lamotte. As you see, he was a Cardinal, I think, who was a teacher at Louvain, Monseigneur Lamotte, sorry, and André Barrault. Okay, actually, this is interesting. I found this image of Lamotte with Einstein, the young Lamotte in conversation with Albert Einstein. It's not a very well-known image. Anyway, so Lamotte was really as objective as you can get when it comes to the life of Buddha. And André Barrault, who has been teaching till a few years ago at the Collège de France in Paris, authors a masterful history of Indian Buddhism, and also the regretted Hubert Durt, an old friend, very good friend of mine, who recently passed away. But it is difficult to stand on this rigid line, right? And most authors end up falling back into the historicist mode, according to which the legend is only the ornamentation of a real life, which can be found in clearing all accumulated waste, the foam of centuries. The historicized approach remains in the spotlight among contemporary historians, who always aim to give the definitive biography of the historical, so-called historical Buddha or human Buddha. If the anthropologist Stanley Tambaya, I mentioned earlier, has recently been able to denounce the Pali text society spirit, it is because this spirit is still alive and well. Okay, I'll skip. There's one more scholar who is still teaching. It's Richard Gombrich in England, who wants to return completely to the earlier approach, the totally historicist approach, and has, without taking into consideration any other approach, and he's very critical of all other interpretation. And he feels that he somehow can really see in the text what is really the teaching of Buddha, right? For example, if he sees some humor in the text, the Buddha must have been a very smart person, therefore he had a lot of humor, so that's the words of Buddha. We can take this as historical. I mean, presupposition of such an approach are so, I would say, so gross that it hardly needs to be considered. It's profoundly reductive, I would say. All right, so all too brief survey of Buddhist historiography. After that, let us return to the unjustly ignored Buddhist mythology. Recognizing the primacy of mythological discourse radically affects the historical discourse on Buddhism. By expurgating from the life of the Buddha all the mythological elements, or rather retaining from them only those that do not offend Western reason, historians have so far found in the historical Buddha a sort of Socratic or Stoic sage endowed with a rational and philosophical spirit. Carried away by their demystifying enthusiasm, they made a clean sweep and find themselves empty-handed. They are reduced to telling legends they despise, hoping to recognize from time to time in them the echo of a historical fact. So most of the historians, when they write a book about the life of Buddha, they want to show that, sort out the fact from the legend, but basically there's not much facts to rely on. So they end up writing a book about mythology, but only to show how much they despise it. It's very strange. To conclude, the life of a Buddha, as it has come to us, belongs essentially to the hagiographic imagination. Even granted that one could detect some traces of memorized events in it, they hardly provide a biographical canvas. Yet historians have been quick to trace and fill this elusive canvas with so-called facts. Whether the Buddha existed or is only a myth, the mythological Buddha, for one, is indeed very real, since all Buddhism derives from it. All in all, the explicit imagination of hagiographers may be preferable to the imagination of historians. If we admit that the narrative of Buddha's life is a matter of literature, legend, or mythology, we no longer have to worry about the subtle dosages to be observed between the historical dough and the leaven of imagination, facts and legend. There is no valid reason for privileging, as has been done so far, the only stories that seem to come from a primitive state, supposedly still close to a raw historical fact. For the historian of religions, all the myths and legends are more or less equivalent. And we must abandon all claims to completeness, since the myth is by nature open, creating itself while creating us. No origin, therefore no alpha point of emergence, but also no omega. All variants of the myth are equal, and there is no original myth. The latter is only a virtual origin. The Buddha, as we can reconstruct it, his life, according to tradition, will always be a virtual Buddha. Whatever his historicity, his life remains a founding myth, indeed one of the great myths of human history. Approaching the myth in its historical development as a living process is the only way available to us if we want to avoid any reductionism, whether mythologizing or historicizing. The person who may have inspired the legend of the Buddha sunk right into the dark abyss of time, like a stone to the bottom of the water. But the waves produced by this event never cease to spread to the surface of human culture. Trying to understand the mystery of that life from a historicist point of view amounts probably to misinterpretation. The life of Buddha is first and foremost a narrative, and in the end, it does not matter whether it is mythological or realistic. My last point is that all the developments of the Buddha's legend, including those that took place outside India, are worthy of consideration as they contributed to the creativity of the Buddhist tradition. Faced with the impoverishing vision of a certain historicism, which reduced the life of Buddha to a banal curriculum vitae, we must choose the opposite view, which consists in deploying the range of possibilities and considering the Buddha's life in its deployment as a tribute to human creativity, tradition, and cultures. And this implies giving Chinese, Korean, Southeast Asian, and Japanese lives of Buddha and Tibetan life of Buddha the same value as Indian lives, and to late lives the same weight as to early ones. Because whatever historians may think, chronology is not a criterion of truth in this area. What makes the value and flavor of the Buddha's life is perhaps what remains when we have exhausted all the scholarly interpretations and simply let ourselves be carried by the word, the text, or the picture. At the end of a journey, the Buddha's life ends or opens on a mystery. Thank you so much. I had back problem last week, so my back is...
I think I'll take advantage of being the introducer to ask one question, which would be of common interest to everybody here. It is about the birth of the Buddha. I have been puzzled by this question for a long time. You see, the birth of the Buddha really, right, shows us it is a virgin birth. It's also an immaculate conception, right? So the same idea, immaculate conception and the virgin birth, appear in the Christian Western tradition, right? Jesus Christ came into being as a result of immaculate conception and virgin birth. So I wonder, has any historians ever, compare this question, whether, the two civilizations about, the birth of their spiritual leader had any sort of direct influence? In other words, whether it is the Indian tradition about the birth of the Buddha influenced the Jesus Christ birth or the other way around. Mm-hmm. So this is my simple question.
Yeah. All right. It's a simple question, but it's a hard one to unpack. Of course, the similarities have been noticed, for a long time, and the Christians were not too happy about that, by the way, right? Yeah. Now, in terms of chronology, of course, if we are thinking of historical lives, then the life of Buddha, the legend, would be earlier. That the birth of Buddha would be earlier. But frankly, the contexts are so different. Yeah, the notion that a great man would not be soiled, by normal biological birth seems relatively easy to understand without positing any kind of influence from one culture to the other, right? You just don't want, there are also stories of virgin birth, as it were, right? So you just don't want your great man to have suffered like any other man. Well, in the case of Christ, it's more paradoxical, as it were, because we are told Jesus came to suffer like a man, right? And yet he avoids one of the main moments of a hard human life, namely birth, right? In the midst of blood and all that. So in that sense, he didn't become quite completely human, according to despite what the Christian tradition is claiming. The Buddhists never made that claim, right? That the Buddha became a man. It was always seen that the Buddhists, there's in Christianity, there's a notion that somehow there was a notion that was rejected in the 4th century, that the Christ has not really come to earth. He had just manifested, some kind of avatar, as it were, to teach the humans a certain, truth. That's close to the Buddhist notion, right? That somehow the Buddha manifests himself, but he's not really affected. He doesn't really truly become human in Buddhist tradition. But that story, on the Christian side, that was soon dismissed. No, the Christ really become human to the full extent, right? And had to suffer on the cross, which the Buddha didn't, of course. So, question of influence are important, but I think we just have no elements to solve that one. Yeah.
I have a question. Today you mentioned the Buddhas is释迦牟尼佛. It's only one Buddha. He came from antique Buddhas. He come to India to be the prince, and when he come to India, he don't know he's a Buddha. He had learn, and he come out the Buddha things. But for us Chinese, the Buddhas, billions Buddhas. For example of me, I pray the Buddhas. I go to a test college. I pray the Buddhas help me pass the test. And when I make a business, I pray the Buddhas help me succeed for the business. The Buddhas agree, and 30 years ago, we are the $10 million US dollar export, flour export. And when 26 years old, I married, but 35 years old, I don't have kids. I pray the Buddhas, give me the son, and he gave me son. And when my mother sick, I pray the Buddhas help my mother better. And one time my mother better, but he died. But my father he died 92 years old. I prayed with Buddhas, and pray the Buddhas, and when I take a cover out, his face comes to Buddhas, because he believed the Buddhas, and it's our thought, our Buddhas, for my personal life.
So, yes, there's one element that certainly those historians, for instance, would not consider, is that faith is a major element in Buddhism, right? So having faith in the Buddha has become, to all practical purpose, a savior, right? Same, not so different in this case from Christ in Christianity. That's development of so-called greater vehicle, the great vehicle Mahayana, which is in China and in East Asia. Early Buddhism didn't believe in that, right? For the early Buddhism was a teaching of salvation for oneself, right? So you couldn't help anyone else. You accumulate merits, and eventually then you might find deliverance, you might find an awakening. So there was a major change then when the idea that somehow you could transfer your merits to others. And that's why you have the so-called notion of bodhisattva. I mentioned bodhisattva as the name of the Buddha before he became a Buddha, but in Buddhism in general, bodhisattva means beings who have accumulated so much merit through their practice over a long period of time that they have enough merit and to spare, so they can actually help others. They can, through these invisible merits, they can save others. And so you have great bodhisattvas like Guanyin, right? Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, but Guanyin in Chinese, Kannon in Japanese, who are out of compassion saving beings and respond when people pray to them with utter faith, as in your case, right? So, as you know, for instance, the Dalai Lama is said to be a manifestation or an avatar of this bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara. That's why, of course, when we think about Buddhism, we think nowadays we think about compassion, right? And compassion, which can help this, we can make these beings, these great beings, Mahasattva, Bodhisattva, save other people, right? Respond to people's prayers. Now, this form of Buddhism is definitely not, is clearly very close to other religion in that sense. Early Buddhism is very different in this respect, right? In early Buddhism, you cannot pray to the Buddha. We are told the Buddha is gone into nirvana. He's no longer there. He cannot really help you. Now, very soon faith developed, also in early Buddhism. But it really did so, as I said, in this so-called greater vehicle, Mahayana, Dachern. So yes, for most Buddhists, this is really what Buddhism is about. And this is important. But Western understanding of Buddhism, totally scholarly interpretation of Buddhism in the West, completely bypass this. Faith doesn't play a role in them. It's only practice, meditation, so it's pretty much like early Buddhism in that sense. You can only help yourself. You can save yourself. You cannot really save others. But later Buddhism developed this notion of altruism. And that's what you describe here is that, right? So I agree. So Buddhism, the word Buddhism is a blanket term covering many different realities, right? There's been 25 centuries of evolution, you can imagine. Practically everything you can say about Buddhism might be true or false, because there's always another form of Buddhism that's going to be different, right? Sorry, you had a question about, yeah, okay. You want to follow up to this?
Both in your presentation and in the book, I get the impression that the scholars, that the history of scholarship seems to be, unlike unleashing the power of Buddha, whom this lady so beautifully expresses, is a kind of attempt to domesticate the story of the Buddha. To what do you attribute this? It's almost a fear of the story in the historicist approach.
Yeah, as I say, they're trying to transform the Buddha into a British gentleman, right? So, and that has to do with this history of the discovery of Buddhism, right? So, Buddhism is rediscovered. The Westerners had heard about Buddhism before, but Buddha was like just an exotic figure, very strange, they didn't know. Then in the mid of 19th century, they start really reading texts from Nepal and other places, start translating, starting to really get access to the real teaching. And then they are really thrilled because this is a time where 19th century, right? Positivism is on the rise, and they think they have found a religion without a God, right? So there's all this anti-Christian take there. They think so they want to re-emphasize, now here is something sensible, right? a philosophy. It's not a Buddhism is not even a religion, then it's a philosophy. But even if you say it's a religion, it's a rational religion. It's exactly what the French Revolution would have had. Robespierre and others, like a rational deity, a rational God. That would be great, right? So that they started really developing this idea that Buddhism is like that, a religion without a God, without faith, without all the paraphernalia, rituals and all that, right? Basically, it's just the opposite of Catholicism in their mind, right? But of course, that's not, they projected their own desires on that, right? And has nothing to do, it's just another fanciful interpretation. Very little to do with Buddhism on the ground, as we just heard, right? The real Buddhists, then they pray to the Buddha, they expect, to be saved or other things, right? But basically, it's very different.
Well, thank you so much for the talk. I find your critique of the historicist approach to be really compelling. And I wonder whether this kind of heterogeneity within the narratives about the Buddha's life is also embedded in the heterogeneity within the tradition itself. Embedded in the heterogeneity of the Buddhist tradition itself. So if you look at the doctrines, if you try to find out the core Buddhist doctrines, any attempt to do so would likely to meet with frustration. Right. And I also wonder, like in your study about these different narratives, whether you find any parallel between a particular school's doctrinal commitments and the way to construct the Buddha's life. So in other words, are these two aspects mutually self-reinforcing? Do you think that their particular doctrinal commitments come back to shape how they construct the Buddha's life, and vice versa?
Yes. It's a very good question. As you can say, Song Yao has been one of my students. So I'm very, yeah. No, you're right. So definitely the evolution of the life of a Buddha followed the doctrinal evolution, right? And so in East Asia, with a great vehicle, now the historical Buddha, moves to the background. He's not seen as so important anymore. He's replaced by other Buddhas like Amitabha, or Bodhisattvas like Avalokiteshvara, so Amitabha, right, and Guan Yin. And so now the idea is that it's no longer the idea that there is only. We move from, like in the West, the notion of a universe to the notion of a multiverse, as it were. The cosmology, right, changed also. So the idea was that there was this world, there's only this world and only one Buddha in this world. Now we have many worlds and many Buddhas living at the same time. So there are other Buddhas in other universe, and they can also appear in ours, right? Then, so you have all these parallel realities. So the notion now is that, there are not so many Buddhas. Well, in theory, there are many, many Buddhas, millions of them, but in practice, there are only a dozen or so that are really significant, really relevant to people's lives, right? And this idea goes with the notion that the theological notion that somehow everyone can be a Buddha, right? Everyone has in himself or herself a Buddha nature. So the historical Buddha just developed this Buddha nature, to its full manifestation. But ideally, everyone could do the same. So you get teaching like Chan, Zen, Buddhist, right? The notion that somehow you have to see your own Buddha nature and become a Buddha. Now the idea is still the original Buddha remains more important than you when you become a Buddha. But still, the idea that you can get there yourself, right? So suddenly, the world is full of Buddhas. There's maybe like 50 Buddhas in this room here now, right? Although you don't know it. You still have to realize that you are Buddha. This is good news, right? You are a Buddha already. Just you have to know it. You just have to realize it. How do you do that? Well, this is going to be for another talk.
Okay.
I won't say it today.
I think so many people who want to speak.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm too long here.
And two last questions. This is one. And then the front, there's one.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing talk. Can you comment a little bit on how you see the relationship of historical or historicist approach and methodological approach to actual practice. I understand that practice is very different in different traditions. I'm particularly interested in the Zen or the Vajrayana perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, as we saw that there are many developments, and certainly in East Asia, in India and in East Asia, the Vajrayana, also better known as Tantric Buddhism or esoteric Buddhism, and Chan in China, or Zen, better known as Zen, or Son in Korea, could be seen as the two main trends, right? How do they develop from practice? Well, again, the methodological approach, I'm not sure exactly how to relate it to that, right? Because scholars, by and large, have not been really interested in practice, and practitioners have not been interested in scholarship. There's really a rift there, right? But the question is, how does this spiritual conception, are they, because if you look at Buddhist philosophy and doctrine, it's incredible, right? There's the richness of it, right? The wealth of it, and there's always like a proliferation of treatises and so on and so forth. And then with an attempt sometimes to simplify it, Zen is one example. There's just too much talk. Let's forget about the scriptures. Let's forget about the theory. Let's come back to the practice. But this is part of still a kind of theory, as it were, right? Anti-theoretical theory, right? Just like in one of my books, I was talking about ritual anti-ritualism. We are against ritual, but this is a form of ritual itself. So, all does this? Is this just spinning out of, like, in ways, philosophical discussions, debates? Clearly much of it derives from debates. In Chan, in Zen too, the people were fighting with each other, to be recognized by the emperor, so they developed new theories and so on. So you can see there is a kind of philosophical driving motivation, let's say. And then, or is it redeveloping? Is it just an expression of your own meditation experience, right? If you say, we all have a Buddha nature, are you saying this because some precursor, some philosopher has said that and you developed this theory, or did you actually see it? Did you actually experience it? That's not very clear, right? There's this notion, for example, that we all have this kind of basic consciousness. And this is really, the problem the Buddhists had is to say, how do you bring together the notion that on one hand, there is karma and rebirth, from life to life, like in the life of Buddha, and the fact that everything is empty, then that you have no self. Self is an illusion. Well, if self is an illusion, why do I care, right? Why do I care who is going to be reborn at some time down the road if I'm not there, right? So if myself is an illusion, once I'm gone, so how do you keep the morality going, right? So they found this notion that between one life and the next life, the other's life, there would be a substratum, a consciousness, which is also what they call Buddha nature, something that would remain from one life to another. That's really the most basic reality. So they come up with really interesting concept, but basically you can see they did that because they needed to explain how to make sense of rebirth and karma. Otherwise, karma doesn't make sense. If you are not there, what does karma and retribution mean? It means nothing. So they needed that. So you could say, okay, that's a philosophical construct. On one hand, you can really see why it would have been concocted for that to explain. But they also claim that they derive this from their own meditation. And which is which? From a distance, as a scholar, based on the text, there's no way to, people have been debating endlessly about that. Say, oh yeah, it's just out of the result of meditation, you can see your true self. Well, yes, okay, show me your true self. You can't, right? So you have to take them at their words, and then maybe they are just philosophers spinning wheels, right? So I don't know how to answer your question. This is really, but the doctrine and the image of a Buddha also developed based on the development of the doctrines, but the doctrine itself is driven either by, as in the West, by philosophical conception, or it's driven by actual practice, right? Those are two sources. They might be both. They are not really exclusive of each other, right? There might be some spiritual realization, and then on which you elaborate by creating a new philosophical doctrine, and then also a new life of a Buddha, right? All this can go together. Oh, but I'm sorry, it's someone.
That leaves me the honor to ask the last question. You know, I was just struck by what you described as this historicist. The more empty-handed end up. So it reminded me that some of the critics coming from the same time of the 1920s, 1930s will point out very quickly in terms of historicism that the one thing that historicists never recognize, that they themselves are object of history, and that their way of looking at the past also is contingent on history itself, and then in this case ever more so really based on Protestant scholarship. And so it reminds me very much this debate that particular view of thinking about a tradition is really informed by Christian view of what religion looks like. It looks for doctrines, it looks for faith, it looks for time.
Right.
But there are other modes by which other religious traditions, Judaism being one of them, kind of made sense of its own past, text, commentary, genealogies of disciples, and so on and so forth. So how does Buddha look like if one doesn't look or try to look at Buddha through the lens of the historicist and says, well, that's a particular way of looking at the world, but also one that dominated probably the world only for, I don't know, 250 or 300 years.
Right, yeah. So you're right, it's very interesting. Historicism and historical approach, I mean, claims, as for a long time claims to have the high epistemological ground, right? Saying somehow that you are outside of it, you can be objectivity, right? So we can really, and not realizing how much we are embedded, of course, ourselves in history, and therefore there is no way to be really objective at all, right? The most objective thing you can do is to recognize that, right? So you're right. And so basically we had this image of the historicist image of a Buddha is actually a Protestant image, pretty much, right? And what they rejected was what they could call the Catholic image, right? The Buddhist full of rituals, beliefs, paraphernalia, and so on and so forth, right? So we are always embedded in some kind of history. You're right, and yeah, thank you so much. This is very.
Thank you so much, Professor Faure. I hear us trying to answer one question at the heart of your book, which is, how do we go about trying to understand that which we know we cannot fully understand? Thank you for reminding of this. Thank you for being here this evening. And if you're not on our mailing list, please let us get on our mailing list so you can hear about the upcoming lectures and readings and concerts, all sponsored jointly by the school and the center and the Crow Museum to make this a wiser, better world. Thank you, Professor Faure.
Thank you again.